Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this ATL Partners webinar where we'll be covering trends we're seeing in e-commerce and last mile delivery and how the pandemic has impacted those. I'm Kirby Fine, a principal on the investment team at ATL Partners. I'm joined by Gordon Branoff, CEO of Pilot Freight Services, John Hill, President and Chief Commercial Officer of Pilot, and ATL Executive Board members Jerome Lorraine and David Beatson. Jerome recently joined our executive board in July, and prior to that served as CEO of CEVA Logistics North America. Just before we get into it, I'd like to remind everyone about our speaker event next month on drones. We'll have the head of the U.S. Commercial Drone Alliance, as well as the UPS Drone Flight Forward team speaking about the future of drone technology and its impact on aerospace and logistics. We're hosting this speaker event in conjunction with our annual investor conference on September 17th. And if you'd like more information, please reach out to our investor relations team at ir@atlpartners.com. In terms of agenda for today, I'll walk through some slides to provide some background, and then we'll open it up to discussion questions for the panel. Please submit written questions throughout the webinar via the Q&A option at the bottom of your Zoom, and we'll address as many of those as we can at the end. So one of the primary drivers of demand for US home delivery is increasing e-commerce adoption. So as you see on the left side of the page here, e-commerce sales have grown at a 15% CAGR since 2010 and maintained that same 15% growth rate in 2019. The pandemic accelerated this growth with over 50% of the US workforce working from home as of April, and analysts forecasting US e-commerce growth in the range of 18 to 25% for 2020. On the other hand, the US retail sales forecast vary wildly for the year, from up 2.5% to down 11%. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Slide 2 illustrates the impact the pandemic has had. You'll see US e-commerce sales growth was an incredible 44% in the second quarter. This gain in e-commerce, though, didn't make up for the overall impact on retail sales, which were down 3% in the second quarter. Looking at the monthly data in the bottom right, overall retail sales growth was highly volatile, ranging from down 15% year over year in April to up 7% in June and July. And as I mentioned, there's a wide range of forecasts for US total retail sales growth for the year. And part of the uncertainty centers around the amount and duration of future government stimulus. There was the one-time stimulus check paid, in addition to the $600 unemployment supplement, which ran from early April to the tail end of July. And interestingly, a University of Chicago study found that more than 2/3 of people on jobless benefits made more than they did from their employment. There's also uncertainty around the unemployment rate, which spiked from 4% pre-COVID to 15% in April and has declined to 10% in July, but that rate of reduction slowed compared to prior months. Despite the high unemployment rate, though, US household income in June was above the level it was in February, but the percentage of household income coming from government payments increased from 17% pre-COVID earlier this year to 31% in April and 26% in May. So while it remains unclear how US household income will hold up either from further stimulus or further reductions in the unemployment rate, what seems to be more clear is that e-commerce can continue to exhibit strong growth despite declines in total retail sales. One early data point from August from Bank of America credit and debit card spending showed e-commerce growth in the first half of August, consistent with April through July levels. And one reason for the expected continued e-commerce growth is that there remains significant white space, with penetration still relatively low at 11% of total retail sales in 2019, or e-commerce penetration of 16% excluding auto, gas, and food, which I'll refer to as adjusted retail sales. This 16% is up from 6% in 2010, and JPM's latest forecast is for e-commerce penetration to reach 20% of adjusted retail sales in 2020, which is up from their pre-COVID 2020 estimate of 18%. So while the long-term implications of COVID are still playing out and some level of normalization will occur as stores reopen, It's our view that the pandemic has driven some level of lasting step change in e-commerce penetration. This chart on page 3 implies that e-commerce penetration was pulled forward by about a year due to the pandemic. And this is effectively accelerating an existing long-term trend that's expected to continue, with penetration forecasted to reach 30% by 2024. Another important underlying driver of e-commerce growth is mobile penetration. As you see on slide 4, mobile e-commerce sales have grown at a 32% CAGR since 2016, and mobile accounted for 30% of overall US e-commerce in 2019, with that expected to approach 40% by 2022. So as we look at how this growth in e-commerce varies by category, of the top 4 highest growth categories, highest growth e-commerce categories over the past 2 years, 2 are key heavy bulky categories of furniture and appliance and sports and fitness, which have both seen accelerating penetration during the pandemic. And then interestingly, on slide 6, when we look at penetration rates by category, you can see there's a relationship between the penetration level and the rate of growth, with the lowest penetration categories of CPG and furniture and appliance also being 2 of the highest growth categories. And the reverse is also true, as you see 2 of the lowest growth categories of office supplies and books and magazines are also the 2 highest penetration categories. So as we think about how e-commerce growth in these different product categories impacts the logistics markets, it's important to understand the different dynamics of the US e-commerce home delivery market between parcel and heavy bulky. There's a difference between the network and the infrastructure required for the single driver in a UPS truck delivering parcels versus 2-person delivery and assembly of a large outdoor furniture set. So starting with the parcel market on page 7, it's a concentrated market with 4 players, USPS, UPS, FedEx, and Amazon delivering 90% of the parcels in the US. It's a $114 billion market that's grown at a 9% CAGR over the past 5 years. And digging in further to how these parcel volumes break down, you'll see of the 18 billion parcels delivered in the US in 2019, 59% of those were e-commerce B2C. And of that 10.6 billion, 42% were Amazon packages. And of those 4.5 billion Amazon packages, Amazon delivered 52% of its own packages. And so looking at the outlook for the parcel market and how Amazon is expected to trend, as you'll see in the top left here on slide 8, Amazon's expected to go from delivering 52% of its own parcels in 2019 to 85% by 2024. Additionally, Amazon's third-party shipping of non-Amazon packages is expected to go from a de minimis level today to 15% of non-Amazon parcels by 2024, as they've committed to significant investments to expand capacity. I note this third-party shipping service was in the testing phase in a few cities, but was halted in June because Amazon said it needed its people and capacity to handle a surge in its own customers' orders. So the suspension is expected to be temporary as capacity limits are stretched this year, and will likely resume in 2021. So summing this up, if you look at the right side of the page, through both its own parcels and growth in third-party delivery of non-Amazon parcels, Amazon's expected to go from delivering 22% of total US e-commerce parcel deliveries in 2019 to 45% by 2024. And interestingly, the other parcel 3PLs are still expected to grow at 5% despite the share loss to Amazon, given the overall growth in e-commerce. And so shifting to the heavy bulky market, the US heavy bulky e-commerce last mile market has a very different structure than the parcel market. It's a smaller market at 13 billion versus the 114 billion parcel market, and it's growing at a faster rate of 12% versus 9% of the parcel market. As you'll see here, it's much more fragmented with no single player representing more than 7%. And as you think about those players, we've seen heavy, bulky, last mile logistics players that are well positioned to benefit from the secular e-commerce trends we've talked about, having traded at high valuations in recent years. So I'll stop there. And Gordon, I referenced earlier some of the growth trends in different categories. Can you talk about what you're seeing in consumer demand trends from your vantage point at Pilot, and how e-commerce products and the types of products consumers are purchasing has shifted during the pandemic?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thanks, Kirby. So just for some context here, our Pilot B2C home delivery segment is focused on heavy, bulky, non-conveyable product, those types of goods where you're typically needing a driver, like Kirby talked about before, a driver, a second man or a third man to help with the unloading and the installation and possibly the white glove service as a result of the delivery. So it's a little bit of a different segment in that space. But in that segment, we saw significant increases in demand for a lot of the outdoor furniture, outdoor pools, freezers, home exercise equipment, grills. When you think about it, the products that really people were buying, preparing themselves to stay at home. And we saw a significant increase there. And I'm thinking that we're likely going to have a generation of great free throw shooters as well as a result of the huge numbers of basketball nets we've delivered in the last couple of months. My son excluded from that improvement in free throw shooting. And interestingly enough, the daily shipment count in May, a couple days in May, reached peak levels where we saw our third largest shipping day in our company history in May, which obviously was very unusual and really a result of the times we're in.
Great, thank you, Gordon. And as we talk about, heavy bulky delivery market typically requires going into to customers' homes. John, how did the pandemic impact in-home services, and what are you seeing in terms of consumers' willingness to welcome people into their homes?
Yeah, good question, Kirby. What we saw was, first off, we had to consider safety. That became the number one priority, first for our drivers and then for the consumers' homes that we were entering and we're just delivering to and setting up the proper protocols. When the pandemic first hit, we had those immediate hotspots like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Philadelphia, and then it just spread everywhere else, and we had to stop in-home services. We thought about bringing it back in Q2, and so did others, but we hit a second wave in the Carolinas, Florida, Texas, and California, and we had to stop those in-home services once again. So like you said, we were typically used to going inside the home, 2-man, room of choice, debris removal, and a light setup. And now that has shifted to delivery to the door or delivery to the garage outside the home in a secure spot with no signatures, a verbal, and maybe a photo. But that's a trend that I see continuing, that we would not go inside the home for two reasons. I don't think customers are ready right now to welcome drivers inside the home is the first reason. And the second reason is the e-tailers are realizing that this price point of delivering to the door versus going inside the home is sometimes half the cost. And when you buy a heavy, bulky item, you are paying for that delivery. It's built into the cost of the item. So these e-tailers are realizing we could lower that price point that we would typically sell. So a TV or a grill that may be priced $650 may be the $650 may be the entry level price. Maybe you could bring that down to a $500 or $550. So it allows those e-tailers more choice in that shopping cart, which is what they want, and have more products to sell online.
Great, thank you, John. And e-commerce has obviously surged during the pandemic, up 44% in the second quarter. I talked earlier about the uncertainty around total retail sales, but our views that e-commerce growth could continue despite that. But John, what are you hearing from customers in terms of their outlook, and to what extent this is a temporary bump or a permanent shift to the right on the e-commerce penetration curve?
Yeah, Kirby. I mean, in talking to our customers, I think this is a permanent shift to online sales. Walmart announced in Q2 they had double the revenues in their e-commerce product, Walmart.com. Target had triple the volume in Q2. You saw significant tailwinds for both Walmart and Amazon, thanks to the stimulus package, which I think helped more the parcel than it did the heavy bulky, because our you know, our items are a little bit more costly. But you know, when you look at people now, they're doing stay vacations. They're not going on vacation, and that's going to continue into the fourth quarter this year with people staying at home. So you know, right now they're, you know, making sure their backyard looks good with new patio sets and high-end grills, pools, and you know, for people staying at home, you know, I think you recall what you'd see in the beginning, people on their laptops sitting at their kitchen table, and now they're realizing, I'm spending 10 hours at home, I can't sit on that same chair, so they're looking at Steelcase or Herman Miller and buying a $1,300 chair that they're going to sit in for 10 hours. So I think that's going to take off. You mentioned the category of furniture. Furniture is now really becoming, you know, probably the highest item in the heavy bulky category, outselling TVs. And I think that will continue. You've got traditional retailers like a Raymore and Flanagan or an Ethan Allen, where people would go to the showrooms to buy. And with today's demographics, people are very comfortable now, you know, spending $4,500 on a couch. And as long as the online reviews are good, they'll make that purchase. They don't have to come into the showroom to sit on it to see if it's comfortable. Walmart and Target and others have announced closing on Thanksgiving Day, which will again feed into that peak period. You know, Amazon's not as vocal on their plans as some of the other customers out there, but you know, clearly their numbers are all going in the right direction. You know, the general consensus of customers, I would say, in the e-commerce space is that it's highly predictable and planning is very difficult. And I think we'll see that to come. It's like when they asked Mike Tyson, you know, when the reporter said, Holyfield has a plan. And Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Well, we certainly were punched in the mouth here with this pandemic, and every e-commerce company or new entry retailer into e-commerce are really looking at things differently. You know, if you're new to it, you're jumping in and getting involved in e-commerce. And if you're a current player, you know, you're reviewing your whole omni-channel. You know, so you may go from just having DCs to having to shipping vendor direct, or improving your net promoter score, or selling back a store like a Best Buy is trying to do, or a Bed Bath. You know, these companies have to change. They have to pivot in order not just to grow, but in some cases survive. So, you know, I think we're heading for really good growth. Most people are going to be home, still working from home, and they're going to buy online.
Great. Thank you, John. It doesn't sound like anyone expects e-commerce penetration to revert to pre-COVID levels. And as we know, logistics requirements for e-commerce are very different from that of brick and mortar. So how does the shift to e-commerce change the supply chain landscape? And I'll open this one up to the panel. Maybe Gordon, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure, Kirby. It's a great question. I mean, one of the areas in e-commerce that sometimes doesn't get talked about are returns. And actually returns in the heavy bulky space and overall e-commerce generally are 25 to 30% versus an 8 to 10% rate for the bricks and mortar facilities. So it's a significant return rate, and it presents a real opportunity as well, because there is no great wholesale return solution, and I think there's a couple reasons for that. Typically on the returns, you have a profitable segment, a more profitable segment of business on the net revenue margin side, but operationally challenging. I mean, you think about the return of a sofa or the return of a television, it's not going to be in its original packaging. It's going to make it more difficult to send back to the e-tailer's distribution center or FC. And many times the e-tailer doesn't want the product back right away, or sometimes at all. So you end up having to house and warehouse that return. So it does add for some operational challenges, but nevertheless, I think presents a pretty big opportunity on the return side. And it's not just returns where we have some operational challenges as well, but when you're dealing with the pools, the sofas, mattresses, televisions, you're dealing with higher touch, less dense freight. We talked about non-conveyable products earlier, and that's exactly what this product is. It takes people and trucks and larger facilities to move it from A to B in your warehouse or on and off a truck. So generally speaking, you're looking for optimization in other areas. But you know, logistics providers in general have seen higher transactional costs in this e-commerce product. And we saw what happened with UPS and with FedEx as their B2B dropped 25% and their B2C went up 50%. They faced significant margin pressure and also cost pressure because of their increased operating costs as a result of the increased shipment count. So there are some challenges, but obviously, as Kirby presented earlier, huge opportunities on both sides.
Great. Thanks, Gordon. And Jerome, do you want to add anything to that in terms of what you're seeing?
Yeah, for sure. No, Gordon, you're right on the return. There is also one very fundamental things to look at, which explain the difference between brick and mortar and e-commerce, and this is the supply chain cost dynamic. In brick and mortar, the majority of the cost is in the container piece, and then the truckload or intermodal into the large distribution centers. The last miles in brick and mortar are generally done by full truckload out of distribution center with a few store stops. So it can be optimized. There is an economy of scales, and the outbound cost is relatively small because it's full truckload. So the last miles account for something like around 10% of the total cost. Historically, retailers have run a 5 to 7 DC model, distribution center model, to cover the entire country. As on the other side, the e-commerce, 50 to 80% of the cost are from the fulfillment center to home because the final mile to consumer is so expensive. Optimal model is different for e-commerce, where it's better to have a large number of middle to small size distribution center closer to the customers, and particularly in urban areas. This also fractures the volumes throughout the network, which means more of it goes via less than truckload. Because less than truckload is 1/10 of the size of a truckload, and dollar per pound is 5 to 10 times higher. Small changes from a full truckload into a less than truckload model makes a big difference to the LTL, but is hardly noticed on the full truckload side.
Good point there, Jerome. You know, good point, especially on the LTL side. You know, what we're seeing on the last mile side, or that final mile side, where traditional e-tailers like a Wayfair or Mattress Firm, what they would do is typically source 40 to 50 regional players all around the country. And the reason they did that is no one really had a national solution. But you are starting to have some providers like us and others who are starting to offer this all across the country. So it makes it a lot easier to manage a provider who can do that, who can manage, you know, 20 different operations for you versus, you know, a provider who can only manage 1 or 2. And that's because, you know, the customers are looking for consistency, looking for you to manage KPIs like how quickly can you get the product to us? Can you get it there without a damage? Can you train your drivers to do the right protocols to represent our brand the right way? And, you know, they're looking for a better in-home experience for their product. We've seen that supply chain outsourcing has grown from 11% to 22%. You know, most of these customers, you see them out there, it may be a Mattress Firm truck, but it's not actually Mattress Firm doing the delivery. It's done by an outsourced provider. And we feel that that outsourcing is going to really grow, especially in the next 5 years.
Yeah, that's a very fair point, John. We also need to consider that many of the e-commerce products originate from Asia, and the COVID-19 pandemics have impacted the supply chain in terms of reducing capacity as passenger traffic has declined. So historically and pre-COVID, 52% of the air freight traveled through belly cargo in passenger planes, where the remainder 48% moved into all cargo airplane. So you might have all heard of terminology such as naked airplanes, where passenger aircraft have seen their seats removed to be converted into freighters or to offer freighter capacity. We like to call it the freighters, so passengers aircraft converted into freighters. And this new term used is there to describe the conversion into cargo freighters. That has been a good source of capacity for logistic players, so that has brought more capacity onto the market, but it was not necessarily a good source of revenue for airlines, which have been operating at extremely low yields to get the hours for both the pilots and the aircraft. So there has been an impact also on that side.
Sure, and just to add to that, I certainly agree with the point Jerome made earlier about e-commerce causing a shift towards smaller DCs, which are closer to customers. Pilot and ATL did a project last year with the MIT Transportation and Logistics Center last year, analyzing the optimal final mile facility network, which factored in transportation and facility costs and came to very similar conclusions. One effect of this dynamic is that those smaller warehouses have seen much higher rates of rent increase than the larger warehouses. So over the past 5 years, rental rate increases for warehouses below 120,000 square feet has been double the rent growth rate for those over 250,000 square feet. And that's all driven by e-commerce.
Great. Thanks, David. And you referenced there the implications of e-commerce on warehouse real estate. How are retailers with large brick and mortar real estate footprints responding to this shift towards e-commerce?
Sure, Kirby. Yes, we're seeing some retailers with large bricks and mortar footprints pivoting to using their stores as fulfillment centers. So Target, as an example, is one of those betting on this trend. In 2019, 80% of their online orders were fulfilled directly by stores, from stores rather than warehouses. And I don't think bricks and mortar retail stores are going to typically provide the optimal location, but they are close to customers. And so it remains to be seen how well this works. But the idea here is that those stores are very close to the customer. The model of that partial or full conversion of stores to fulfillment centers is also an extension of the trend referenced earlier of having mini warehouses closer to the customer, which then helps reduce transportation costs. So that can also make reverse logistics easier. One final note on that, with lots of mall space, empty mall space in bricks and mortar shopping centers and malls available, those mall owners like Simon Property Group have talked about using former JCPenney and Sears department store locations as fulfillment centers. Again, those locations are certainly close to the customers, so that's not for sure how that's going to play out, but stay tuned because I think we'll see more of that as those mall space is not used very effectively, not the traffic that it used to have.
Great, thanks, David. And Gordon talked earlier about the operational challenges related to surging e-commerce volumes. What are you guys seeing in terms of automation being used to combat that?
I'm going to start here, Kirby, if you don't mind. I mean, on the fulfillment side and the fulfillment center themselves, the labor represents 65% of the warehouse cost. So the surging e-commerce volumes have driven demand for warehouse automation. There was a study that the walking activity itself accounts for more than 50% of the time associated by picking. And of course, by leveraging conveyors and sorters and high velocity systems, average picks rates can go from 60 to 80 in a kind of a manual process, which is already fairly high per hour, up to 300 if you basically bring automation into the game. So also many are using automated guided vehicles within the warehouse to reduce the walking distance to handle the peak parts of the process.
Yeah, that's interesting, Jerome. And for automation on the our side of the business, you also see where it tries to support efficiencies, right? I mean, one example is automated scheduling. There are opportunities to automate, and you've got to take them within this business. And really, if you can coordinate the scheduling when someone goes online and purchases the product, and you give them opportunities for making their delivery at a certain time, and that information goes downline to your destination stations and automates the schedule and the route, and aligns with the destination side, you've created some significant automation efficiencies there. So that's definitely one place, and you know, as a support to the scheduling, the texting of the delivery time and the delivery appointment to the customer is also becoming very important. Saves us time, saves us money, gets to the customer directly, and increases really our on-time performance and our communication overall. Most people don't want to pick up a phone or answer a phone, but text messages people will respond to, and therefore we improve our communication time with the customers and really don't have to end up chasing them around to make a delivery appointment. So that's crucial. And John talked about earlier the trends towards contactless delivery. We're definitely seeing more of that, where we're leaving something in a garage or a backyard, or even without a signature at all, and a picture taken and sent down line to the consignee and to the detailer for proof of delivery. So those are just a couple areas of automation that are available, but you have to take advantage of them where they exist.
Great, thanks, Gordon. And we're running slightly over, but I want to at least take a couple questions from the audience. So the first one submitted here. What is your view of new tech entrants to logistics like Uber Freight and Flexport? How disruptive will they be?
Yeah, I'll jump in here, Kirby. Yeah, that's so those two companies are different than Pilot, and they don't really compete with our core business. Uber Freight is a FTL brokerage company, or trying to be an FTL brokerage company. Flexport primarily is ocean freight forwarding, which is a small part of what our business is. And if you look at what both of those companies are doing, they look like they're building out a people-heavy, facility-heavy operation or operations, and end up looking more like your traditional logistics operations than a tech company. So we really haven't seen anything that disruptive from their side of the business in the tech that's particularly differentiated. However, we do understand the need for investment from the IT side, and we've really recognized that as we've started to invest in our IT going forward. One of the areas that's critical today and will be critical tomorrow to our customers is visibility, and improving customer visibility and providing that real-time data. And we've spent significant time developing our products to support the customer's visibility into the supply chain, get the data they need out of the system, and really complement their needs and their utilization of Pilot. So we've been investing in that, as well as our infrastructure, which really allowed us to be flexible during COVID. And really the architecture of our infrastructure really let us move to the cloud in a quick amount of time to integrate with, to have our system functional in a short amount of time during COVID. And then these integration architectural changes throughout our IT also give us the opportunity to easily integrate with our customers, easily onboard new vendors and new shippers through EDI and API capabilities. So during COVID, we had some of these capacity challenges in carrier relationships. We saw some of these scaled players outperform the new entrants, and we really feel that our IT and our technological advancements and development have really put us in a position of scale, and we feel we've outperformed in that space.
Great, thanks, Gordon. And the next question here, what's going on with the USPS and the new surcharges from USPS, UPS, and FedEx?
I'll take that one, Kirby. Customers, first of all, are not happy about it. It's been a lot of publicity that's come out recently on both the FedEx and UPS increases specifically. FedEx and UPS typically would wait until the end of the year to announce either peak season surcharges or annual rate increases to customers, but this year they did it in May. as their volumes hit peak level volumes, they started instituting, both of them, surcharges in May. And they've just announced a recent round 2 of surcharges that are effective October 2nd for any residential deliveries, any oversized shipments, oversized surcharges, as well as surcharges that are going to really hit the large customers. So they're going to take a look at your average daily tender, and if it was 1,000 shipments a day, if you exceed that 1,000 a day, you'll get hit with an additional surcharge on top of that. So customers clearly are not happy about it. Most of the times FedEx and UPS mirror each other's increases, although on this go round they increased a little bit differently in the same categories, but their increases are not as exact as they typically would be. It's interesting. They are one of the few duopolies out there, and when you have that fact going for you, you can raise rates pretty easily. So it's good for them, and unfortunately bad for the customers, and could be good for other people on either side of that, like a Pilot and other providers who provide some services in the heavier weight items.
Great. Thank you, John. And with no further questions, and we've run a few minutes over here, with that, we'll conclude the webinar. Thanks again to everyone for joining. And just before we close out, I want to remind everyone again about our drone speaker event and annual investor conference on September 17th. We hope you'll join, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks again.
Thanks, Kirby.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.